I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on whose land we are gathered, the Yugambeh people of the Yugambeh language group, and pay respects to elders both past and present.
Welcome to another Academic Skills Centre podcast. Today I'm joined by my colleague Narelle Urquhart.
Hello everyone. So my name's Narelle Urquhart and I'm a Wiradjuri woman from New South Wales, and I have connections into Bundjalung country, and I'm the Indigenous Engagement Advisor.
And we're also joined by Professor Steve Webb. Welcome, Steve.
Oh, hello. I'm Steve Webb. I'm a professor at Bond, and I'm a professor of Australian Studies. And my job really at the moment is to try and talk about Aboriginal culture, the origin of the continent, and climate change, in fact.
Okay, so this year for NAIDOC week, the theme is always was, always will be. And I just want to share just a little bit about how I feel about that statement. So obviously I believe it's true, number one. And essentially, when I think about our land and connection and responsibility of like land, water, seas and mountains, I kind of look at, with Australia, the way in which it was colonised. Like, we have had a dark history, but I believe we can have a brighter future. But when I think about that statement, always was, always will be, it's kind of like, for me, that Australia is a blanket that kind of lays over top of everything that we already hold as First Nations people. And so for me, that statement rings true because everything still exists. It's just like things have been laid over top of what is our land in our country. And so that's kind of just my thoughts on that statement to begin with. But yeah, so that's just, I just wanted to make that statement.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Narelle. So, Steve, you have an interesting connection with Narelle. Are you able to talk us through a little bit about your background and then how you know Narelle?
Yes, well, my ancient background, shall we say? I'd started studying at the ANU in Canberra, so I was based in Canberra, and during that time I was in Canberra, I met Narelle's mother, Iris, and a lot of other Aboriginal people. And it's funny, after all these years, that we've actually ended up, Narelle and I, at the same institution. So that's how we know each other. So through a mother, really, in a way.
And what were you doing down in ANU to come into contact with Narelle's mum, Iris?
Well, I was working at the time. I was at the business, if you like, that I'm in, which was anthropology. I studied at the ANU. That's where I got my degrees. I was doing work in the Australian National University down there. The Australian Museum down there. And I was looking at the skeletal collection that they held at the time, the Aboriginal skeletal collection. And at this particular time, that collection had to be returned to the communities. And so I was actually dividing it up into particular areas that they'd originally been collected from to be returned to those communities again. And of course we needed to identify children and females and males, because the females and the children had to go together, and males were on their own. And so I was doing that work in process of this reconciliation that I called it. I call the Return of Ancestral Skeletal Remains a Reconciliation Act, and it was in the middle, really, of a time when Aboriginal people were really angry at museums all around Australia holding their skeletal remains. For one thing, they didn't know they had so many. In some cases, they didn't know they had them at all. And they wondered why they'd been taken in the first place, certainly without permission. They were probably not given permission anyway. But of course, they were unaware of the history of these collections, which have been collected since the 1930s and before, and placed in museums for scientific sort of study. So when I was doing this work, and when I was working around in Canberra, I met Narelle's mother, Iris, at the Institute of Aboriginal Studies, as it was then. It's called IATSIS now, the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. And so that's how I got to know her. And as I say, I got to know a number of Aboriginal people that were working in Canberra. They worked either in the Institute or at the ANU or in museums, and it was quite a good group of people. One of the people I worked with, which was she was invited to the opening of I can't remember exactly what that was now, but it was something that was being launched by Paul Keating at the Parliament, and I said, "Oh, that's great! I wish I could go over and be there." She said, "You can. You'll come with me," and that was it. And I just got in because I was with an Aboriginal person, and Pat Dodson was there, and a lot of people. But that was a time when we just got together, and things were changing in anthropology. There was a new view of what anthropologists did against what anthropologists used to do. And so that was it was an important time for those sorts of things. So I'm saying too much here. Narelle, please come in.
I suppose, I mean, I met you when I came to Bond 8 years ago, and we quickly established all our connections, through Canberra and Robinvale, Victoria, and Euston, as you mentioned, as well as Lake Mungo, because I grew up in Robinvale down on the Murray. And so I know quite a few of the sites that I know you've been to. And so we made a connection very quickly, through obviously my mum, but also through all the people that you know that I know, quite a few uncles. And so I think, we made a strong connection straight away. And so I feel very honoured actually to know you. Yeah.
It's quite mutual, I can tell you. But especially when we found out they were people, some of the people I met were your relatives. One stands out particularly, Bruce Baxter down in Robinvale, and your Uncle Bruce. And I was on my job at the time was a liaison. It was a liaison with Aboriginal communities over the bones, because in the museums there were these groups of skeletal remains from communities right along the Murray. And one of them was from Robinvale, Euston, Robinvale area. And so I used to visit each of these communities there were land councils then. And that's how you got to meet the community, through the Lands Council. And so I visited Robinvale, and the man I met there was Bruce Baxter, your uncle. And we talked, and I told him who I was, and I said I was a biological anthropologist, and I actually worked on these remains as well, and this is what I've found out, and so on. And I tried to explain, there was a lot of what we call fake news today, but there was a lot of fake news out then about how many individuals there were. People thought there were thousands and thousands, and there weren't. They also thought that the ANU had actually actively excavated these or dug them up, whatever. And that wasn't true either. So I was trying to tell them about the history of this and how many were involved and that sort of thing. Anyway, after a while, Bruce said, I'll show you something. And I said, oh, right. And he took me out to the Euston Forest, and there was these hearths all over this area where he took me. And there were lots of them, old hearts, of course. They could have been hundreds of years old. I have no way, we didn't date them. But as we were walking through, he said, "What about this?" And he sort of nipped round a tree and put his hand up on the tree. And there was this massive canoe tree. This canoe had been cut out of this tree. So it was a canoe tree, it was called. It was just magic. And I actually took a picture of it on this tree. And I think I've passed it on to you, Narelle. But I was surprised how nice people were to me at a time when they were so angry about the remains. And I was somebody that actually worked on the remains. But I think they were grateful to learn about what these remains are all about. And if you like, the truth about the remains. And we started to invite people to these collections in Canberra and in Melbourne. It was in Melbourne as well. And to see for themselves what they were. But of course, a lot of Aboriginal people said to me, "We don't want to go near bones. You know, that's not our thing. We've got one or two people that can, and they might want to go." A bit like white fellas with funeral directors, that nobody wants to handle the dead, really. We've got people that do it, and it's exactly the same in Aboriginal society. So this was the time I was trying to I'd heard so much fake news that I was trying to bury this fake news, or terrible phrase, but I was trying to get rid of this fake news and put a bit of truth out there, because I knew all these collections anyway. So it made me a bit guilty, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can remember growing up in Robinvale, and there was a site where they found remains. I don't know, like us kids, like we would hear lots of things about what was going on, because I was only young at that time. And so I think, a lot of the Indigenous people were quite sceptical, a bit angry, a bit hurt, a bit unsure. We're pretty scared, like, of remains being dug up or being brought back. And so there was a lot of, it was two sides to the story. And obviously we just passed things like trust and just the miscommunication and things. So there was a lot. I know that you went through a lot of things to build those strong relationships and have a good, and a big impact in those areas. And like Uncle Bruce, he was like quite a soft person. Like he would have been open and very accommodating, because that was his nature. Like, you actually found a good fella there. But in saying that, people were like justifiably right in their suspicion and things like that, especially in that time. And like you said, like with the fake news and perceptions and thoughts and feelings around burial sites and massacres, and what we thought the university, why would they take, people's remains and all those things. So yeah, quite an emotional time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Each night I was glad to get to the motel and sort of drown my sorrows. It was pretty stressful, all right. I mean, especially I met people like Darcy Pettit and I can't remember his brother, but his brother was, I actually looked at him like Blackbeard the pirate. He was a very big bloke, and he had a big voice, and I can't remember what would be in his name. Narelle?
So Uncle Bucky, Uncle Darcy. So there's a few brothers. And they were quite strong and big.
Yeah, and big. Yeah, very frightening. I remember being in a meeting at Lake Mungo. We had this massive meeting. There was about 80 or 90 Indigenous people there from representatives of communities in the Murray, and they thought it was an appropriate place to have this meeting in the woolshed. And of course, it was quite close to where the oldest human remains in Australia had just been found, or they'd been found earlier. And people there were politicians there and others, and we were all sort of sat on rails and things, and people would get into the middle and talk about and rant and rave about what had been done, and that was fine, but it was quite unsettling. But I heard some of this fake news being talked about and bandied about, and I said to Bucky, he's a big fellow beside me, and I said, I've got to get out there and say something. This is not true. And he said, go on, get out there. He said, but you won't find any friends when you get out there. So anyway, I did. But anyway, and then I met somebody else there as well, Mary Papin from the Mutti Mutti people down in a bit further west along the Murray. And, well, not the Murray, Murrumbidgee there. But, and so that provided connections. And she was very fierce and very strong. And I thought, I've got to meet this woman because she's, like a mover and shaker out there. And, I've got to meet her. And it's her 70th birthday in a couple of weeks. We're going to send some flowers down because we can't go across the border. So, but anyway, look, that's another thing. But I met friends. I met people that did become friends. And so a lot of people now have gone passed on, but and they were lovely people. Some of the old person I met in Deniliquin, the old lady, she said, if you disturb those bones, she said, the spirits will be fighting overhead. And as she said that, she put her hands up and went like that. She said, the spirits will be fighting overhead. Very moving it was. And so, because that was in Deniliquin, but that's getting towards your country there, Narelle.
Yeah, well, I grew up, I was born in Leighton, so Wadri country, but I grew up on Lachi Lachi, so Robinvale, and I know like Balranald, Deniliquin, Mildura, all those areas. But I think, it's interesting that she spoke to you like that, because obviously, like Indigenous people, like the spiritual part of our life is as important as the physical, like it is 50-50. So there's consequences and reasons, and it's not just like those kinds of, like the scientific side of things. And so it was an interesting, I don't know how you would describe it, like there's a lot going on in all those conversations and emotions around the bones and sites and things like that. So hats off to you, but
I suppose this conversation leads when you mentioned, Narelle, about the physical and the spiritual side. So at the time of recording, probably 10 or 12 days ago, Rio Tinto blew up some caves in the Pilbara region. And I'm sure you both have strong opinions about that. Maybe you can share your thoughts.
For me, it was just blatant disrespect. Like, I think there wasn't any excuse. Like, people knew what was there from my understanding, and like they say, it was a mistake, but that's just not acceptable to me. But that's just my personal opinion. And so I kind of, I don't know, like it's a sham. Like, I don't know how else to say it, but I feel like it's a sham. Like, I feel like people have done what they wanted to do and got what they wanted to get, regardless of who we are and what we hold. Like, but that's just quite a strong statement, but it's personal because the cost is so great.
And is the cost not just physical, it's spiritual? Yeah.
And it's, like our responsibility for care of country. Like it's historic, it's ancient. And I think, there's, I don't know, like it's kind of, it's not repairable. And I think Rio Tinto and mining and companies and politicians, they're answerable, because at the end of the day, this land is ours and we hold responsibility to our ancestors and to ourselves for that care of those sites. And so, I don't know, like for me personally, as an Aboriginal person, I don't know, it sort of plays on a lot of emotions, like what? Like your responsibility in it. Like it's personal. So I'm a bit hardline about it, to be honest.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, when I heard about it, I was shocked. I was shocked for a range of reasons, but I was shocked that it could happen today. I mean, we talk in the things I teach. I talk about land rights, where it began, and one of the watersheds was Nunkambah, where miners just went straight into Nunkambah, even though it had been designated sacred area. They never found anything, but that's not the point. In the meantime, they defaced the area, really. Now, that's 1978, so that's 50 years ago. Well, it's not, it's 42 years ago, and we're still getting it, we're still doing it. I mean, what's happening? The miners knew about these sites. Rio Tinto knew about these sites 6 years ago. But they went ahead with it because the legislation actually let them go ahead with it. Now, that legislation should have been changed years ago, even more than 6 years ago. It should have been changed 40 years ago to prevent this happening. Now, what they've done there, they've actually collapsed 50,000 years worth of history into a pile of rubble. Now, it's not the first time. The Burrup Peninsula art has been damaged by a large gas project out there. My view is we should do a large site survey of the Pilbara. Should go right across it. And same with all remote areas in Australia, because a lot of the time we don't know what's there. Perhaps Aboriginal people do, but they don't necessarily tell us, which they say want to keep it out of our... They don't want white fellas to know where things are, because they might go out there and steal them, like they used to steal bundle burials out in the Carnarvon Ranges. But so that's what I think should happen, but it has to be underpinned with proper legislation. I mean, I worked around and in the Willandra, Lake Mungo area for years, and you wouldn't go in there and start mining. So I just don't understand how people would have gone ahead with this. It sounds to me as though the mindset out there hasn't changed for years and years.
Yeah, and it's true about what you say, like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, like people know their sites, their country, they know the stories, they know their responsibilities, they know the spiritual connections, like what's happened there for thousands of years. Like, so yeah, I don't know, like as an Aboriginal person, you just kind of continue to feel not valued, like your culture and your practices and your ownership of land and stuff. Like it just, I don't know, it continues to be a compounding thing, when it comes to our rights to land and country. And so, yeah, it's just disrespectful, and a lot of everything that we do comes from a place of respect. So it's pretty much the exact opposite of how we conduct ourselves. So, yeah.
Yeah, it seems to me that what Rio Tinto's done is probably only the tip of the iceberg somewhere, but in some places. But it really, to me, it made me think about the marches this weekend and gone, and the issues of Black Deaths. It's like, let's crush the sites as well. It really does. I thought a lot about this, and I can't come to any conclusion. Let's just crush the sites out, and then they won't be there, will they? And then they won't be able to go back to their sites, so they'll keep off our land, right? The miners would say. Now, I worked for an iron ore mine 55 years ago, and so in the Pilbara, and so I'm aware of what the miners do and how they think and how they act and so on. And it's a very gung-ho lifestyle. I mean, I changed mine, but it was a very gung-ho lifestyle of, let's get in there and let's do this. In fact, when I was there, the owner of the area wanted to use a nuclear device to blow the Pilbara up. So all they'd have to do is shovel it into trucks and then shovel it into boats and sell it. But that was stopped. That was stopped. Sometimes I think only just, but anyway. So look, that's my view. The view is, if you're going to crush sites like these, what's the hope for the culture in Australia? And you're not only crushing sites that are so old, but you're crushing the people's spiritual and their connections. You're crushing that. If you destroy a site and somebody has got links to that site through birth or conception or whatever, then they haven't got it anymore. They're not linked to the land anymore. That's what they believe. It's their belief system. And well, you might as well go and say, well, there's some uranium under St. Peter's in Rome, so let's blow the thing up and get the uranium out. I mean, same thing.
We need to wrap the episode up. So I'll just ask for final thoughts. So the theme this year is inviting us, all Australians, to embrace the ancient history of this country. Have you got a message?
Well, I think just talking about those two incidences, like the mining and Indigenous, like black deaths in custody, and I think like through those events, is even obviously they're tragic, but I think it's an opportunity for the light to be put on to what's really going on. So I think like through these kinds of things like NAIDOC and other events, but just every day actually, it's Australia's kind of starting to grow up to a place where they're recognising who we are, where we've come from. So I think it's a good time to reflect on our nation and our First Nations people. So for me, this week, how can we say it? Like NAIDOC week essentially has been put on hold or cancelled, but the spirit of reconciliation, recognising and working together is always here. And so I feel like, it's just a time to reflect and build.
Steve?
Yeah, it's very easy to be negative, and there's plenty of room to be negative, but there are a lot of people out there working together. Aboriginal people or Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. There's a lot of recognition amongst the Australian community of the value of Aboriginal culture. I mean, people go and see the sites, they go and appreciate it, they appreciate the art and everything else. And they're very pro, if you like, Indigenous. We see a lot of the negativity occasionally. Well, we do more than occasionally, but in fact, there is a glass half full. The only thing is, from my point of view, we don't want it half full. We want it as full as we can get it, and that part is up to the politicians and their determination to make rights of what we are now as a nation between the Aboriginal people and the non-Aboriginal people. They have to bridge the gap, because I think most Australians have tried to bridge the gap. So it's down to the politicians. That's my. But I haven't got a lot of faith in it, like a lot of people haven't got a lot of faith in our legislature.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for your time. It's been a real pleasure taking us through your stories, and thank you, Narelle, for joining us today. I'll put some links in the show notes below, and thank you for listening.